call the April 23rd meeting of the Rutherford County Regional Planning Commission to order, please. If you'll stand with us, our Vice Chair, Craig Lynch, will lead our prayer and our pledge.
Bow with me, please. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and the blessing and the opportunity to give us here to come today and serve our fellow man. It is an honor, and we don't take that lightly, Heavenly Father. And the things that we do here today and the deliberations we do, we pray that you'll be with us. You'll give us the wisdom and the guidance to do the right thing, and just continue to be with us as you have been in the past. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Place the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Call the roll, Gail.
Rhonda Allen.
Here.
Richie Boland.
Here.
Veronica Buchanan.
Here.
Will Jordan.
Here.
Mike Cush.
Present.
Craig Lynch.
Present.
Pettis Reed.
Here.
Steve Sandlin. Mike Vaught.
Here.
Vincent Windrow. Jeff Phillips.
Present.
We have quorum.
We need to approve the minutes of our March 26th meeting. Call on Vice Chair Craig Lynch.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the minutes of our meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. No items deferred.
No, sir. Everything's still on there.
Bond extension, Forest Ridge, Section 3.
Mr. Chairman, we've received a request to extend the bond on Forest Ridge for a year. They have not, it's basically due to economic reasons. We recommend approval for that request.
Okay. You have staff recommendation.
So moved.
Have a motion
Second.
and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And that motion carries. Waiver request. Mr. Enrol Sauls is requesting a waiver from a distance requirement for fire hydrants for subdivision lots for property located on Kings Road.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you stated, this property is located along Kings Road. It's on the west side, and it's immediately adjacent to the Wilson County line. The property as it exists is approximately 8 acres in size. The applicant's proposing to subdivide the property into 2 separate lots, about 5 to 6 acres on one, which would leave the remaining 2 to 3 acres on the other, which would make it a subdivision because the one tract would be under 5 acres. So because of that, it would have to meet our subdivision regulations. But before beginning the process, this is something that they were considering doing. Before beginning the process of getting a surveyor and a plat drawn up, they would like to see if they could get the waiver to the fire hydrant requirement. Information from Consolidated Utility District was provided to us after the comments were written, but does indicate that that line could not support a fire hydrant. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I believe there are some representatives here for this application as well.
Any questions or comments?
Cannot support a fire
I
hydrant.
cannot, sir.
So would that then require them to put in a sprinkler system?
Not for the number of lots. When we made those revisions to the subdivision regulations a few years ago, it was only for major plats, major subdivisions. Actually, we'll be dealing with that on the next application, as a matter of fact.
I'm familiar with the track and the applicants, and I don't think there's any intention even to build a house there. They're selling to the adjacent property owner, so.
A motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion to approve and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And that motion carries. Final plat approval. Jesse Jordan, 4 lots, 72.5 acres, zoned R15, located off East Pitts Lane. The developer is Jesse Jordan and Gail Maxwell. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you stated, this property is located off of East Pitts Lane. Planning Commissioners, you'll recall that the original comments that went out, there was a discrepancy in the comments that we sent, so we did email you some revised comments, so I'll be going off of those comments, the revised ones, today. The development's currently 3 separate tracks, as you can see from the map that's on the agenda materials, but the applicant wishes to re-subdivide it into 4 separate tracks. 2 of the tracks do contain existing houses, and you can see on the plat on your table, that would be lots 1 and 4. There are existing houses there. The 2 other tracks are intended for sale. Track 1, which would be considered a flag lot, will have its own access on the East Pitts Lane. The other 3 will utilize a 50-foot easement because it's 3 units, 3 lots, excuse me, or under. It won't require a paved access way. And again, Lot 1 already has its own access because it's got the flag lot all the way to East Pitts, so that one's is okay. And all of these tracks are over 5 acres. The applicant is requesting a fire hydrant waiver for the plat as well. I didn't put that under the waiver request. I figured we could kind of lump them all together in this plat application. According to information provided by Consolidated Utility, and this is where the discrepancy was, originally when the comments were submitted to us, what had happened, the original calculations, they didn't think the area could support a fire hydrant. But when we really got to looking at it, what ended up happening was when I had sent the comments over to CUD originally, it was just a typo in the tax map. So they reran the numbers, and it turns out that there is an 8-inch line there, and if you do put a fire hydrant in front of the property, it can support a fire hydrant. The only issue that you're going to run into is Lot 1 would be the only lot in this configuration that would be within 1,000 feet. All the other lots being so far off the road would still be outside of 1,000 feet to the hydrant, even if it was put right in front of the property. So after discussing that with the applicant and the applicant's design engineer, and Ms. Allen, this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago. About 2 or 3 years ago, we'd made some revisions to our subdivision regulations that said any major plat, if it did not have adequate fire protection, they could request a waiver to the fire hydrant requirement, but those lots that were outside 1,000 feet would have to build sprinklered system homes, essentially. Now, this would only apply for lots 2 and 3. 4 already has an existing house. That one would not have to go back and retrofit, and neither would lot 1. So I just I give that all out there for your consideration. After speaking with the applicant's design engineer, he spoke with the applicant about it. The applicant has no issue with that. His plans are to sell off lots 2 and 3 anyway. It would just be a matter of putting a note on the plat so that whoever bought the lots would understand that there was a fire hydrant waiver granted for this property if one is granted, and that 2 and 3 would require a sprinkler system in the home in lieu of that fire hydrant for fire protection. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. The plat in and of itself, besides that issue, is in pretty good order. So if you do recommend approval of this and vote to approve, I'd recommend you do so with the conditions that the waiver be approved. That's your desire as well.
How close is the closest fire hydrant from this drive?
About toward the bottom of the plat under East Pitts, about a third of a mile, roughly. And that'd be going to back to the west. This is actually on the south side of the road, but the way the plat's drawn, I mean, the way you're looking at it, so it's upside down, essentially.
So lot 1 would be serviced by the fire hydrant.
If you were to require them to put a fire hydrant right in front of the property, it can support one, and lot 1 would be able to be serviced by that. It would be within 1,000 feet. It's lots 2, 3, and 4 that would have the issue.
Okay.
There's already an existing house on lot 1, though, is there not?
Yes, lots 1 and 4
And
both have
4.
existing houses.
So
That's right.
4 is basically grandfathered, right?
Well, I mean, it'd be on a new lot. So again, even with the waiver, it would not be required to put the sprinkler in. It would only be for lots 2 and 3.
And they can't be serviced by a new fire hydrant anyway.
Right, they'd be outside 1,000 feet. Based on our subdivision regulations, it wouldn't meet those regs.
The questions?
So if we vote for approval with the notes that lots 2 and 3 are noted on the plat that they would require,
Yeah, essentially.
under new regulations, they would require a sprinkler system.
Right, and what we would do is we would just come up with some wording for the plat to
Okay.
submit to the design engineer for them to put on the plat before it's recorded.
Okay.
And you said the applicant's in agreement with that?
Yes, based on the information I received from the design engineer. Yes, sir.
What's your concern?
I'll make a motion that we approve the fire hydrant waiver subject to all staff comments, including those lots being sprinkled.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries. Submitted for site plan approval, we have two. Johnny Spy site, that's total new construction of approximately 2,500 square feet on 0.8 of an acre, zone services with a conditional use permit for warehouse located at the intersection of John Bragg Highway and Floration Road. Johnny Spy's developer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you stated, this property is located at the intersection of John Bragg Highway and Floriton Road. Planning Commission members will recall this zoning application from their March meeting. Also, the Board of Commissioners did vote to approve this rezoning at their April 12th meeting. The applicant's proposing to operate a foundation repair business on the property and will store their equipment on the property. There'll be no customers coming to the site. There are inadequate soils for a septic tank, so the applicant has received permission from the state to do a chemical toilet on the property. Really, the plan is in good order. We'll work with the applicant as far as landscaping and any screening requirements and whatnot. But the plan in and of itself is in pretty good order. Fire protection was not an issue. There's a couple of fire hydrants within 1,000 feet of this particular property. So with that, we do have some representatives here for this application, so we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
So open for discussion.
The building where it juts out into the easement, is that okay with Middle Tennessee Electric?
Yes, part of our rezoning comments was that they checked with Middle Tennessee Electric before that, and our understanding is they have spoken to them. They're fine with the location. They'll have to sign off on the site plan as well before we issue a building permit, so. If anything, it would just require.
I remember discussing that in great detail when we did the, a
Right.
month or so ago.
Right.
'Cause I was kind of surprised. They signed, but there was a representative here and he
Mhm.
said they were okay with it, so
Mhm.
they signed off.
Doug, so the chemical toilet, will it go inside or out?
My understanding is it's outside the building.
Like a
But,
porta toilet? or something?
Essentially. Now, the whole lot's going to be screened anyway
Okay.
and fenced, so I don't think you really see anything.
Any other questions?
Make a motion to approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second motion.
Second to approve. Any other discussion or questions? All those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? That motion carries. Item B, Southridge Church of Christ. It's total new construction, the addition of portable buildings, 464 square feet on 3.12 acres, currently zoned R15 on Barfield Crescent Road.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you stated, this property is located along Barfield Crescent Road, which is soon to be renamed to Veterans Parkway, which is noted on the site plan. Just to the east of Southridge Boulevard. Southridge Church of Christ is combining with a second church, and essentially the portables that were located at that second church are being relocated onto this property. There's no other improvements that are necessary as far as parking additions or anything like that, because the size of the sanctuary is not proposed to change, and this wouldn't kick in our landscaping requirements either. With that, there is a representative here from Huddleston Steel that can answer questions, Mr. Manley Thweet, and with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
You said we have no landscape requirements for these buildings?
Not for this wouldn't kick in our landscape requirements because of they're minor additions. So.
Other questions, discussion?
Meets all requirements?
Yes, sir.
Make a motion to approve it.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any other questions? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposition? That motion carries. Staff reports.
No, sir. At this point, you'll notice that on your agendas, we will be having a work session. If you'd like to adjourn this meeting, give us just a few minutes to get set up, then we'll be pretty much ready to go. But other than that, we have nothing further. So.
We are going to adjourn our regular meeting and then re-enter our work session, if that's okay. So,
I have a question.
sure.
While we're in the work session, can we make changes?
Yes.
Or can we only do that during a convened meeting of the?
We can propose changes in a work session.
All right, just curious about that. We gotta if we're gonna do the change, we gotta do them at some point in time. I was wondering when it was actually gonna be.
You need a motion, don't you?
We're adjourned. Okay, we'll go ahead and
What you doing with that?
we'll go ahead and call the work session into order, if you don't mind. And I think Mike is still making some telephone calls, but we'll go ahead and get started with the item. So,
Okay.
Doug, I'll just turn it over to you and your staff.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a continuation of the discussions for the draft zoning ordinance and zoning map. You know that we had our last public meeting a couple weeks ago, a public hearing on it, and we received a number of comments. At that time, after discussion, the Planning Commission asked us to just continue on with the research we were doing into everything, and also to continue deliberations on what we were talking about. So this is, again, a continuation of that. We do have our good part of our consultant team here today. We have Ms. Michelle Kendall with Parsons Brinkerhoff, and as well as Mr. Bill Terry with Bill Terry and Associates. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. Just a couple things. We're all going to make some comments today, but just to kind of start out, there were some comments that were brought up at the last meeting regarding the zoning of the county and what we're proposing and everything. And doing a little more research into that, I wanted to bring up just a few of the examples that were used during that meeting of surrounding counties and how zoning is handled there, as well as a couple of others that we've looked into. But we'll try to, hopefully this technology will work here. Here we go. This is Wilson County's zoning map, of course, being directly north of Rutherford County. You can see a majority of the counties, the colors may be a little hard to differentiate on the overhead, but a large area of Wilson County is broken down into this green area. This is their agricultural zone A1. This yellow area here is their R1 zone. And you can see, it's hard to see the legend there, I apologize, but you can see there's some other classifications, just various zonings around the county. The big issue came up with, the comments that, Rutherford County is one of the only counties in the state, if not that has pretty much the R15, 3 units an acre type zoning in the county. The comments that were made at the meeting seemed to indicate that Wilson County had the ability to go down to 25,000 square feet, provided adequate infrastructure was there. That is true in the R1 area, which is their one of their residential zones. In the A1 area, which is all this area here, the minimum lot size is 1 acre, regardless of whether or not there's adequate infrastructure. It does allow a slight deviation to that. If it has the water and the sewer, it can go down to 40,000 square feet, which is not quite an acre, but it's pretty close. So that was just something I wanted to bring to the Commission's attention, that Wilson County, really, this isn't really a whole lot different than what we're proposing for Rutherford County at this point. That's one. This is Knox County, and again, this one's a little more difficult to look at on the screen. Knox County, of course, where Knoxville is, toward East Tennessee. You'll see a majority of their area, and the way they handle their zoning map and their what I could get online, they break this down. This lighter green area out through here, you can kind of see, is their agricultural and estate zoning. That makes up about, and I've got some notes here, excuse me, their agricultural is about 72% of their total, and again, it's similar to the 1 unit an acre out in this area. Excuse me, my notes, just kind of looking through my notes here. But that's also the same. Of course, Knoxville City, it'll be a lot different, of course, being inside the city like that. And then, of course, we're probably more familiar with Williamson County. A majority, now they're also in the middle of going through a zoning change, updating their zoning ordinances as well. But most of these areas out here in their unincorporated area, as we know, are 1 unit per 5 acres. So that's pretty much, and that's been like that for quite a while. And I don't think that's proposed to change much, even with their new zoning. A couple others that were brought up at the meeting. Excuse me again, I'll just get through some of my notes. Washington County was another one that we looked at. Now, they didn't have their zoning map online. Now, they do have a minimum lot area under their agricultural zone, which is about 90% of their lot area, which is what conversations with their planning staff indicate. They do have a minimum lot area of 1 unit per acre. Now, there are some exceptions to that. If there is public sewer, you can go down to 15,000 square feet. If there is water and private sewer, like a septic tank, you can go down to about a half an acre. And then if there's no public water or sewer service, it'll be a 1 unit per acre. And again, that's 90% of their unincorporated area. Jefferson County, Tennessee, that was another one that did not have a zoning map online, but after speaking with their planners, they say a majority of their areas, about 85% of their land, is zoned agricultural A1. According to the information I found online and with conversations with them, that does require a 40,000 square foot lot size. There are a couple others that require larger lot sizes, but that's really for more industrial type areas. They require 5 units or 5 acre minimum lot. There are some lot requirements with some of the other zoning districts if there's public sewer and everything available, but not so much with the agricultural zone. That really applies more toward their residential zones. So that's our proposed zoning map, again, right there. We also talked with the planners from Montgomery County, Clarksville. Their minimum lot size out in the unincorporated area is 1.5 acres. And if there is sewer water available, they do allow for rezonings in that situation. So just going through some of the zoning ordinances that were brought up at the meeting, and then just a couple of others just in our area as well. Now, something that as we were looking at some of these other areas and looked at some of the ways that they handled the zoning in the rural areas, you'll see that there was a handout on your table. And at the top it says add a new section to Chapter 4, Section 404. It should be a front back handout. As a possible alternative to the RL zoning, or in addition with the RL zoning, I should say, the Plan Commission could look at instituting some sort of a infrastructure requirement like we see in Wilson County and some of the others that we looked at. Essentially, what we are proposing at this point would be you could reduce the lot size to 15,000 square feet if there was public sanitary sewer or a decentralized sewer system on the property, a step system, something like that, with sufficient capacity as determined by the provider. Adequate water services available for both domestic and fire protection, again, as determined by the water provider. Lot size would be allowed to go down to 22,000 square feet, roughly a half an acre, if there was adequate water for domestic and fire protection, and adequate soils existed based on the determination from the state of Tennessee Groundwater Protection Division. And if in the event that either water service wasn't available, that's really the kind of the linchpin here. If water service was not available or does not meet the minimum requirements, like the line's not big enough or something to that effect, lot sizes would be 1 unit per acre. And that would apply to the RL area. So I think that would address some of the concerns that we have been hearing about. There are properties in that RL, the yellow area here on the map, that can support, they have the adequate infrastructure to support development, and it would still keep that protection, in the other areas where it did not exist. And interestingly, this is kind of what we've seen just through the research that we've done. The counties that do something like this, it's always using the lower density out in these areas, but allowing a higher density if infrastructure exists. We've also made, going on with that sheet, we've also made a few other tweaks to some of the language for road improvements. Basically, the 1101, the next section down, deals with traffic studies. And it was the intent that if a traffic study is done and infrastructure improvements are recommended, roadway improvements, those kind of things, it didn't really just come right out and say that those improvements would be provided by the developer of the project, so we just kind of clarified that a little bit. Also, the next section down, 1101K, we stated for future street improvements that for the purposes of any future widening, newly developing properties would be required to dedicate adequate right-of-way to be consistent with the long-range transportation plan, which is essentially what we do now. But again, the wording of that wasn't real clear, so we wanted to kind of beef that up just a little bit. So that's essentially the comments that I have at this point. I know Ms. Kendall has some comments that she would like to make regarding the land use modeling that was done for the comprehensive plan, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point before we move on.
In this handout right here,
Mm-hmm.
it says lot size may be reduced to 15,000 square feet. That would be an automatic right?
Yes,
or
that would be part of, yeah, if essentially how we see this working is somebody comes in with property that's zoned RL, they want to develop a subdivision, they would have to go to the water utility you know, and find out what kind of infrastructure existed there, if they had the capacity to do what they wanted to do, to provide the fire protection, you know, for the fire hydrants and everything, and as well as domestic service. And they bring that information back to us, at that point, it just becomes a development as of right. There would be no rezoning or anything associated with it.
Could they still go for a rezoning to what we have now?
Yes.
That's
always an option, yes, sir. I mean, and regardless, I mean, that will always exist. That option always exists, so.
After the next day after the last meeting we had, I got a call from a rather large landowner that is immediately outside the conventional zoning into this RL. And you know, his statement to me was, I don't have a problem with it. But he's sitting on a good bit of what I would call good red dirt. That's, you know, class 1 or 2, and it's good soils, and it's gonna perk, it's not low. Could he still do a conventional subdivision under this right here?
Yes. Yes, he could.
Septic tank, you're talking about septic
The
tank?
regular
Septic
septic
tank.
tank
Well,
subdivision.
That don't say that.
If it was
It doesn't
just,
say that, and that's the reason
if it's
I'm
a
asking.
septic tank, if it's just septic tank, that would fall under, I think, the second of those 3 options there. If they weren't going to do a step system and didn't have sanitary sewer, public sewer, they would be to the basically 1 unit a half acre is what they'd be down to. They would be allowed to build a little more dense, but not to 3 units an acre.
Well, Doug, I spent a while building houses as a licensed contractor for 6-7 years. I've never seen a lot with a septic system that fit on a 15,000 foot footprint anyway. Your step system lots do, but realistically, there's some engineers out in the crowd, I think. You're not gonna get a house on 15,000 foot with a driveway and a soil site and an alternative site. I mean, it'd take a perfect world. I mean, and so I would think that the subdivisions we've approved in the past that were on standard septic systems have pretty much run 20,000 feet or more in actual space. So I'm wondering what this actually does. I mean, does it just muddy the water? Would it be about as easy as well off to just leave it all RS-15? Because, you know, well, this is gonna happen anyway. Because a house with a septic system is gonna take 20,000 plus square feet, in my opinion. I'm not an expert, but, you know, I've had people at Huddleston Steel tell me before about a piece of property where you're gonna end up spending 5,000 feet per lot, you know, to fit your driveway and your building envelope and your setbacks and stuff. So, I'm just wondering, you know, why not just leave it all RS-15 and we'll do the same thing? Because we're not gonna approve a subdivision that doesn't have perk sites. We're not gonna approve a subdivision that doesn't have water. You know, nobody's even gonna be able to develop that and stuff, so.
Well, again, of course, it's always going to be up to what the planning commission wants to do. We feel this is a better approach because it's not, you know, the issues that we see now with the 3 units an acre pretty much everywhere in the county. This recognizes the fact that there may be some.
3 units an acre.
Right, and I realize that. I understand that.
1,000 foot lot, and that's after you take your roads out and all your utility easements and everything else. And so, you know, I don't know where it came up. Everybody starts talking about 3 houses an acre. There's not 3 houses an acre in any subdivision in the county.
Right, I realize that.
15,000 feet in a lot, you know, and so if that's a 100-acre farm out there, there's not 33 houses on that lot, or I mean, 300 houses on that piece of property.
Right.
They're significantly less because you got to take all your roads out, and then you've got to have 15,000 feet per lot. But I'm just saying, on a house on a septic system, you're not fitting it on 15,000 feet anyway. Maybe in a 1 lot in 1,000 that's in a perfect world with a perfect kind of dirt and laid out it, and you're going to have a house that's only 30 feet wide or something like that. But I mean, I like where we're going here. I would like to go to just leave it all as RS-15 myself, but I mean, I think this basically does the same thing.
Well, I think it recognizes the fact that there are properties out there that won't be able to handle that kind of a density. But understand, you know, with leaving the yellow area there, but leaving this for an option, that understanding that, yeah, there are some out there that will.
Well, those same properties that wouldn't fit here wouldn't be developable anyway, regardless of how they're zoned. You know, that won't, you know, somehow places are straight up and straight down in solid rock, and you're not going to fit a house on 10 acres, much less half an acre.
But at the same time, that yellow and orange, you're still treating them both differently. And that's the problem I have with that. There's a lot of things in the orange that won't do it, but we're giving it to them by right. Yet it's the same thing if you're in the yellow or not. And that's the problem I've got with taking out the.
And I understand, but I think it just reflects the reality that not all property is the same when it boils right down to it. Even if you zone all the property, one particular classification, not all property can be zoned or can be developed at the same density. I mean, there are so many other factors involved that go into that. I mean, I understand where you're going with it, Mr. Bowman, I do, but I guess that would be my response to that is just because it's all zoned the same, yeah, we're treating them all the same, but not all property really is the same in that regard. So
People that have bought property in the last 28 years have been told that.
I'm sorry. What?
People that have bought property in the last 28 years have been told that it was all zoned the same. You know, and ever since 1984, people that have paid for property and paid taxes on property and haven't developed the property when the times are good and are living next door to another subdivision that, you know, they're having to put up with. And now, you know, I mean, I think this is a good step, but I agree with Richie. I don't think the people ought to be treated differently because we should have never zoned, in my opinion, the county R15 to start with, but it is where it is. And I know Miss Allen said we're walking along, nobody's following us, we're walking along, but we are where we are, you know, and these people have owned this property all these years and have held this property, and a lot of people are just waiting for the times to pick up, and their retirement is in their house, in their property right there. They're waiting to develop and all. And if we're gonna give it back to them, you know, as mentioned earlier before we came up with this plan, that if anybody comes up and asks for a variance or it has to be zoned back, we'll zone them back to R15. And if we're gonna do that, what's the point to start with? And I don't know. I like where you're going, but I still wish we'd go a little farther. But
Doug, does this adequate fire protection? If it's in the far reaches of the county, we don't have CUD water. Guy has 6, 7 lots, digs wells. Does wells provide adequate? It does not provide adequate fire
I
protection.
doubt it would provide adequate fire without having someone from CUD here to verify that. I doubt.
CUD is not
yeah.
involved.
Okay,
But
I'm just saying with someone with knowledge in that and those kind of matters. But
this adequate
right.
fire protection would take out being able to use wells because the house on fire, electricity's gone, the pump won't work. I mean,
yes, I would say you're right.
That takes wells out of the picture.
Right. Now, that's not saying they can't develop. That's just saying they would have to still be at the 1 unit an acre is really what we're proposing
They
here.
won't have adequate fire protection.
What's that?
Adequate fire protection, other than a volunteer fire department, there's no water line there, what
Right.
I'm saying.
Right. And I think that's what would play into part of the adequate fire protection. Yes, sir.
I read of a case just last week where somebody like that built a swimming pool just so that the fire department could pull it out if they had a fire.
It's a good drop tank, isn't it?
as long as they don't drain it for the winter.
I hear a lot of people, and Will just kind of brought it up, R15 was a mistake. I don't agree with that really, because if you look at where we're at now, if we've used 20% of the county's land over the last 20 years or whatever that we went R15, if we didn't have that, how much land would we have left today without the sprawl? I mean, you know, in other words, if we could fit 3 on one, and we put 3 on one everywhere we could, and if we didn't allow it, we would be putting 1 on 1. So in other words, we would have already used up 3 times, at least twice as much land. So, you know, I don't call it a mistake. We're only gonna be able to build so many houses on the land we've got. Why not use as much of our land? And, you know, we're pretty much stayed inside the orange with the subdivision. What I thought we were looking for when we started all this was a way to turn down a subdivision that we all felt like it wasn't time for that property to develop. Whether it's water, whether it's roads, or whatever, but I don't feel like we've got any teeth, no matter if it's in the yellow or if it's in the orange. We still haven't done anything that I found with the new regulations or with the new zoning ordinance or anything that's given me the power to say it's not time for you to develop that property.
Some of the things that you're talking about, we'll see in the subdivision regulations. Of course, that's the second part of the project that we're still working through that right now. We want to get this part settled, but as soon as we're done with that, that'll be the next phase, or really the last phase of the project that we've been working on. Some of those things you will see some of those. Some of the other things, as far as the road improvements and things, we do address in here, the zoning regarding the traffic studies and possible road improvements and those kind of things. And this would, what we're proposing here in the RL area would, I think, go some way to help with some of the concerns you have in regards to saying you have to have the sewer or a step system or adequate water, those kind of things, in order to develop at this density. But those tools I think that you're talking about, I think we'll see more in the subdivision regulations.
One of the downsides to the 1 acre that I asked a lot of questions, asked a lot of people since our last meeting, talked to one of the Bedford County Planning Commission. They are 1 acre size lots outside their urban growth boundary. One of the downsides to acre size lots with the starter homes, they won't mow the yard. They'll just mow part of the yard. The rest of the yard grows up, a car parked in it or something. It's they don't maintain it as much as we would probably like for it to be maintained.
One of the continuing education classes we took, at least some of us took at MTSU, I remember a seminar on the guy saying that 2 acre lots were the worst things you could possibly do from a planning standpoint. It just devoured your landscape on lot tracts and tracts that were too big, because I don't think anybody's moving to Rutherford County for a house. I think people are moving to Rutherford County, and you have to put them somewhere. And the bigger lots you make them move to, that just eats up the county that much faster.
And I understand the comments. I would like to point out, though, that, you know, we're not recommending the whole county be zoned that way. I mean, there's still, I would say, half of the unincorporated county is still going to be zoned for the RM, the 3 units an acre. So I know that there have been some comments out there about housing choice and that kind of thing. That does exist and will continue to exist, even if this is ultimately what's agreed upon.
But
So-
this does loosen up the yellow area where it
Yes.
can be built.
This would, yes, this would loosen, what you're talking about, what's on this sheet,
Yeah.
this handout, yes,
Yeah,
sir, it
yeah,
does.
Yeah. In the final draft, 2 areas are labeled for conservation, which we did away with that,
Right.
5 acres. These areas are approximate and depend on the actual location of lands where excessive slope or soil conditions are considered a development barrier. I live in that area. 1 acre won't work, 5 acre won't work. There's just spots for this right here. I've gone over this before. The land dictates what you can get, and the land is what it is. These spots are there. There's some good spots out there, and this loosens our throat a little bit right here, doesn't it?
Yes.
So we can do that.
I wonder if this just helps the developers, and we still don't have the guy out there that's got an acre and a half that lays just right, and he wants to give his child a lot off one side of or something, and they're outside in the yellow area, and all of a sudden he can't do that because there's not enough to be an acre on each one. I mean, I guess if he's got enough water, he'd get down to 22,000 square feet. I just want to make sure we don't leave
Yeah.
Mom and Joe, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson out there, whoever out, while we're letting the developers in. You know, I want to make sure we don't cut somebody's throat here.
And, you know, unfortunately, no matter what you agree upon, that's always going to be a possibility. I mean, I understand where you're going, but if somebody were to want to create a 10,000 square foot lot, you know, under a perfect scenario, I know, I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility.
Is that where the BZA comes back?
No, I don't.
When we dumping a lot on
Think so.
BZA, why don't we dump that on?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to dump that on BZA. That's more of a zoning issue. You start granting variances to minimum lot size, to me, that's what the zoning of the property is for, not something that the BZA grants variances to.
Doug, I think other night, after everybody spoke and whatever, I think we were sort of given a challenge. I think maybe Mike was the one that said this, that when we left that meeting, we were to go out and talk to other people that this would affect and whatever, and see what was going on. I sort of done that. I think there's 2 of us on this panel right here that it does affect. I think Commissioner Lynch and myself live in the new yellow section, and we both have farms in those sections and live on farms in those sections, which it will affect us. And in fact, I'm looking after a farm that belongs to my mother that it'll affect her too. A farm that's been sitting there since about 1807 when the Reeds first settled in this country. We come here, and that's where we've been. I've been on that, there's been a Reed on that farm that long, and I'm the last one sitting there. And it probably won't be developed into houses. And the thing that I got into is I went out talking to some of these folks, and the folks out there in that area I went around talking to were farmers. And as we talked about this right here, they said, starting back in 1984 when we started developing this sort of thing, nobody gave anything to farmers. We worked at developing. And other night, I've got the list right here as everybody got up there and talked about the different things right there, and the farmer was mentioned. He was mentioned in there, and it was basically, I don't know if y'all noticed it or not, but it was the poor old farmer and how he was going to take his land and what you were going to do with it, and it was his 401k, and I've got that written down here. That term was used there. And all of it was talking about how the farmer can develop his land, not how he can keep it and farm it. That wasn't mentioned at all, and how we can help him do that. But it was all how he could use it to develop it. And since 1984, we haven't even talked about the farmer and how we can keep him here and how he can develop his land. So I talked to a farmer that used to live in Rutherford County. Nice farm out here. You know what happened to him? Development pushed him out. Yeah, he sold his farm at a pretty good price. But when he went to go and buy farmland in Rutherford County, he couldn't do it. Couldn't afford it. He had to go to another county. He had to move out. And he was one of these individuals, his family had come here in 1807 and 1810. He couldn't live here. He couldn't farm it. And you know what we lost? Open space. And a farmer that was gone. Well, we've talked about everything else. We've talked about property rights. We've had these property rights come up all over the place. Everybody's talked about property rights. Well, I'm sitting out here on a piece of property too, and I'm not going to develop it. I hope to keep it as long as I can right there. I don't know if we're talking about property rights. Are we talking about economic development rights and what it's going to cost and what we're going to make off of it and how much we're going to lose? Yes, I understand 401ks. I had one of those. I'd be retired now if my 401k had held up. I had a pretty good 401k, and then something happened. Somebody took it. And yeah, they go missing on us a lot of times like that. And I've got property probably, that happens too. But I think the purpose that all of this, I think, started happening, and we got talking about the comprehensive plan. We had a lot of fine people working on that for about 3 years. And nobody seemed to get involved in it and wanted to say a whole lot about it until all of a sudden we approved it. And then 6 months after we approved it, everybody all of a sudden hollered the barn's on fire. And now we're discussing that, and we've got the zoning here. And I understand exactly what you're talking about there, Will, and Richie, what you're saying there too. But now we've come down to, okay, do we do light yellow, dark yellow? Do we keep everybody in the orange, or what do we do here? So, it's a difficult decision in what we do as far as affecting people's property. If I had the perfect solution, I wouldn't be sitting on this panel. I'd be worth a fortune somewhere else doing something else. I guarantee you that. I really don't have it. I think you've come up with maybe some help here in what we can do here. But we're going to have to think awful close and awful tight. And I wish I had the answer there. The thing that frightened me to death the other night is I sat there and listened to those people. And it was so good to hear everybody come up there. And we had yeses and nos. Those of you that may be sitting out there today that wasn't there the other night. And I've sat here and I've got all their names here and what everybody had here. And I see Mr. Jake Robinson sitting out there today. And he said that we bulldozed through this stuff. And Jake, I want to tell you that if this is bulldozing, I just paid for some bulldozing work out there on my place. I'd hate to pay by the hour what we've done here for the amount of time we spent working in some of this, because we've spent some time trying to get through some of this, and it takes a lot of time to get into it. But one individual in there mentioned the Tennessee Agriculture, Forest, and Open Space Land Act of 1976 on there. And he said that's where some of our problems started. Now, do y'all know what the Tennessee Agriculture, Forest, and Open Space Land Act of 1976 is? It affected a lot of individuals sitting in that audience, and they applauded about the fact of doing away with it. That's called Greenbelt, folks. Greenbelt, which helps a lot of people keep these farms out here by the reduction of their property taxes. And I read about it in the Daily News Journal, in one of their articles back at that time about the fact that we were losing so much open space in Rutherford County in development that we needed some help there. And that law was passed to keep more farms so we can keep open spaces. And it's important that that type of acts and that type of things are done out there to keep open spaces, and that has helped because it's kept a lot of farmers farming, and it's important we keep things like that. Now, if y'all were looking at me thinking I was going to answer this thing for you and what we're saying, you're out of luck because I can't do it. And it's going to have to come on our individual what we think we can do and what we can't do. But there's been a lot of discussion here, and we've got a plan here. We've got this right here, and this will affect me. This will affect my property, I guess is what you would say here. But as I've gone out here in this area and talked to these individuals who have property there, and just as some of you have here, and I think as I think what Mike said here right there, a lot of the comments I've had there is that they've had no problem with it. That's some of the comments I've had from it. And so, you know, we're getting a variety of things there back and forth. But that's just my comment on what I've said.
Since my name was invoked, would you suspend rules so I may respond?
Jake,
Ask a question.
there have been times in the past where we've given you an allotted time and you've kind of exceeded that a little bit. How much time you need?
I can do it in about 3 minutes.
Okay, you're on, partner.
Mr. Pettis, I really appreciate your comments, and appreciate that you brought up the comments I made. The bulldozer I'm talking about is the fact that we've spent way less time working on the actual zoning and ordinance codes than we spent on this ideological comprehensive plan. And it still has not been answered about where those numbers come from, because one part of the plan says we're going to consume 201,000 acres. It's in the plan. But another part of the plan says we're only going to consume about 13,000 acres. It's got to be one or the other. The math is flawed, and we're making our decision based on flawed math. That's not logical. The second part is I'm just a counter argument. When you said this guy was pushed out, why did he sell his farm? He had the right to keep his farm. You say he was pushed out. What do you mean pushed out? If he didn't sell, he had his farm, and he wouldn't have had to try to buy another farm. I don't know his specific circumstances.
Mr. Chairman, may I answer the
Sure.
Mr. Robinson, have you farmed?
No, I haven't.
No, you haven't. Okay. The individual is a dairy farmer.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to farm with houses all the way around you and had to deal with people continually concerned about the smells that you have.
But that's their problem. They shouldn't have moved in there. That's their problem. I'm behind that farmer 100%.
Yes, sir, but it doesn't work that you have to deal with this day in, day out, and whatever. But it just got to the point where it's more than he could put up with. Whenever you're out there trying to deliver a calf in the middle of the field, whatever, and they stop and they try to stop you from doing that, they say there's something
Then the
wrong.
sheriff should have been called, because they are being his rights are that's the property rights are being violated.
This is not the place to argue
I understand.
that. But we've had farmers all over the county that have had to leave because of situations like that. It's called the aggression, continually pushing and pushing. They can't expand their farms because they can't buy more property to farms. In today's agriculture community, it's not the fact that we have more farmers, it's the fact they've had to increase their farmers to increase production. They can't do it because the property around them has already been taken into development. So they have to go someplace else to do that and do things of that type. So that land's not available to them. They can't do it within.
Well, maybe we should have a huge tax credit for farmers so that they can afford to buy more property. I would be behind that. But to say that a guy that buys a piece of property, a home with a yard, is somehow negative issue, or a sprawl or something that's of that matter, it seems like to me that you're also putting a broad brush saying that these people are somehow aggressive, and that's not I don't think it enhances our community to divide or to label that type of issue. I mean, people want a home with a yard, and I think Mr. Lynch is perfectly right. You limit the size of a lot, well then, or if you say our density is going to be 1 house per acre or 1 house per 5 acres, we're going to use up more acreage. I don't agree with the Sierra Club on almost anything, but I do agree with them on that. They have done the study, and it backfires. You use up more of your property. So I just want to point out that we still have that big elephant in the room, which is how do you come up with one hand you're going to consume 200,000 acres, and another hand you're going to consume maybe 13,000 acres out here in this yellow area. The point is that it's already self-regulating. The property cannot be developed if you don't have water, you don't have the right soils. It's already in the, we don't even need these new rules. It's self-regulating. All it does is just puts more bureaucracy and more hoops for people like us to jump through. But I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, but if somebody,
Mike.
Okay. I have an infrastructure question, and really more of a clarification, perhaps. Whether somebody builds a subdivision in the orange or the yellow, if there is not infrastructure, which would include water, sewer, roads, what else am I missing? Fire protection, things like that. Is that the responsibility of the county to pay for that infrastructure, or is it the responsibility of the developer to get infrastructure to that particular site? And I ask that for a couple of reasons, and one is to clarify on the sheet that you passed out, the amendment 1101, where that you have a little gray highlighted area in the event no such improvements, and then the line right before that. I'm trying to get clear in my head who financially is responsible for getting infrastructure to that site, because I'm under the impression, and that could be a very dangerous thing to assume something, but doesn't Rutherford County have some kind of a non-developer or an impact fee that we cannot impose a fee on developers for things like infrastructure?
The county has what's called the development tax, which is essentially it's $1,500 per residential lot and unit. Typically, when we see a subdivision plat, half of that, $750, is assessed at the time the plat is recorded or before the plat's recorded, and the other half is paid when the building permit is issued for the property. That's just for residential.
Okay.
There's nothing on the way of commercial or industrial or anything like that. Typically, when we see subdivisions, if there is, or really any development, if there is the need to extend a bigger water line or something like that, that is done at the developer's expense throughout the development.
All right.
That is typical. The area that you're talking about here is specifically dealing with roads, and essentially what that sentence is saying, and those couple sentences is saying, is if there, during this traffic study that's being done, if there is a schedule for a road improvement that the county's already working on, show that. If there's not, everything else that has to be done is something that the developer will have to do as part of their development. So it's, I guess to answer your question, typically is the county responsible for the infrastructure improvements? No, the county's not.
All right. and my thought process, I mean, Pettis did a great discussion there about the farmer and protecting the farmer. What I'm trying to, my thought process runs just a little bit different in the fact that I was under the impression that one of the reasons why R15 was a poor solution was that it did not give us the teeth to say no to a property. And I thought the concern was, as perhaps land was purchased that was suitable for subdivisions in the yellow part, that you start getting a subdivision here, or like a spot development. You get one here, you get one there, and then the infrastructure is not there to support it. And then pretty soon you've got to bus these kids to a close school, or then you have to come up with the money to build a school in that part of the county. I mean, I was thinking that those were all kind of reasons too, while we took a look at this, to try and be able to say no to a development. But under the R15, we really don't have the ability to say no. Is that a fair statement?
At this point, I think it is. I mean,
Mike, you're talking about the infrastructure leading to the start of the subdivision.
Right.
If you had an existing county road that's too narrow, we would all say it's too narrow.
Sure.
You're talking about that, right?
Well, if it is too narrow, then what I'm hearing then is that the developer is responsible for widening that road for the safety sake of that extra traffic impact. Is that
making, well,
we really don't have the teeth to do that.
Yeah, what you start running into, and that's something we've talked about in the past, where if you have a development that's out a couple miles down a road,
right,
and can you make the developer improve the whole road all the way from his subdivision all the way to where the road is better, I guess. That, I think, is problematic. Because now there's nothing that says you can't require road improvements in front of his project, right-of-way dedication, those kind of things. But to say the developer has to build the road, if there's right-of-way that needs to be acquired, the developer obviously can't do that. That's something that the county would have to do.
All right, I'll go back to my original question. If a large tract of land is developed for a subdivision in the yellow portion outside the orange area, if the roads are not adequate to support the number of houses and the formula for X amount of people living under the roof.
And you're talking about a mile down a 25-foot road that's not adequate.
Mile, 2 miles, whatever. I mean, at R15, he could put one out in the tiny corner of the county if he wanted to.
Actually, at one point in time, talked about pavement width, and didn't we not pass a rule that's pavement's
I think
less
it was 18 foot or something,
feet?
yeah.
You'd be surprised how many of those country roads are less than 18
right.
feet.
Right.
You know, and we do
I
have
was
the ground
speaking
to
of
turn
right-of-way
those down
at
in the current
25 foot.
subdivision regulations.
Right, I think we do.
Okay,
That's
well,
right.
again, my question is, if you put a big subdivision out in the far reaches of the county with inadequate roads and inadequate infrastructure, can we say, currently under the R15, can we say no to that? Or the part B to that is, does the county have financial responsibility just because he chose to build out there? Do we have the financial responsibility to widen the road or to get infrastructure to the site?
The second part of your question, does the county have the resources to do that? I would say no. I don't think we do.
Well, I know we don't have the resources, but are we required by
I don't
any
think we're
law
required
to
by
do
any
that?
law. I don't know if we're required by law to do
Okay.
it. Yeah. The first part of your question, if one is approved out that way, I guess who's responsible for it? Was that the first part of your question? Or can we deny it? I think was your first question.
On what basis could we deny it?
Under our current regulations?
None. There's none.
Yeah.
We have, whatever it is, we have to approve it.
Mm.
If it meets the drainage, and I'm spouting off here, so
I
correct me if I'm
understand.
wrong. If the drainage matches, if it's good, if the soils are good, then how can what tools do we have to decline a subdivision? I don't think we
Currently,
have
I don't
any.
think we have much.
So will restructuring this zoning give us the ability to say no? If you throw out the R15, do we still have any power to say no?
Well, one issue that you would run into is developers would probably be more likely to look into the area of the orange as opposed to the yellow.
Right.
Because, I think we all understand in the yellow area, could you get as much yield out there? No, you couldn't.
Right.
Again, and I think the part of that response goes back to, when Richie and I were talking a little earlier, I think some of those tools come along at the subdivision regulations because the zoning handles one part of it. The subdivision regulations actually handles the subdividing of the property.
And that's my whole argument with this whole thing. There's just as well, there's a lot of those same scenarios in the orange, and that's where I've really got the problem with this.
Yeah, a little off Shacklet Road is River Road over there. It's like 16 feet wide. It's actually the boundary of the city limits. And we approved a little subdivision at the end of it, and that's when we came up with the, I think was one of the catalysts to talk about the pavement width. But that's way inside the orange. I mean, that's at the border of the city limits. But it's a 16-foot wide road or a 14-foot wide road.
But it is a county road, right?
It is a county road. The next time the city moves out, they'll step over that. But as far as right now, it's way inside.
Well, here's the concern that I have, and Mike was kind of touching on this, and Richie, I think it goes to the point, you made about, well, we just need to let, we need to treat everybody equal and let, as much of the land be developed as we can. I'm particularly sensitive to that because, although I don't live right near Lake Forest and Laverne, we don't even have to step outside of our county to look at what bad planning looks like. I've asked Mike Curtis from GIS to pull some more information for me, so I don't have all the information I want to share with you, but these are the things I know right now. There are over 3,100 houses in this one area that were developed in a very short period of time. As a county, we had to go in and build 3 schools to support these families, to support these kids. Infrastructure wasn't there, the money wasn't there, the impact fees don't come near touching it. And of course, this is inside the city limits, but my point is a development like this could happen somewhere in the county that could support it. The infrastructure that's there. You have a large number of absentee owners, which means you have a higher rental rate. You have a very high number of foreclosures in that neighborhood. The city had to go in and acquire a piece of land that had been foreclosed on to put in a police substation because of the crime issues that they were faced with in that development. The initial developer, I just looked on the Laverne website. The initial developer for that property currently owes in back taxes to the city of Laverne $167,000. I don't know what the number is that he owes the county. He has multiple bankruptcies, and yet he's still developing. He's developing right now in Smyrna. I don't know how you get around that. I don't know how you do that, but that's what's going on.
Your point being, Rhonda, that theoretically that development could happen in Halls Hill.
It could. Sure. It could. And so when I listen to what Pettis is talking about and the legacy that these family landowners have, I know that's not the legacy they want to leave this county. And so I just want us to look at that from the standpoint of what's the best way for us to try to put together a plan that's going to be equitable, not only to those landowners, but to the people who are going to inherit that land as it passes on, because we're just stewards for a short time. And my other big concern is, as hard as this has been for us, and this hasn't been touched in 24 years, you know why? So I just feel that added burden that we have, because I don't think anybody else is going to want to touch this for a really long time. So I'll have more information on the specifics of the Lake Forest. I'm not going to beat you over the head with it, but I'm very sensitive to what bad planning looks like, because I grew up in Laverne. I went to Laverne Elementary, Laverne Primary. So we got to get it right. The legacy is too important.
Doug, I got a question. We've talked about the width of the road leading to a subdivision. And we haven't done the regulation part yet.
Right, the subdivision regulation.
Within the regulations, could we put the teeth in there to eliminate, to deny a subdivision that's on that, 15-foot road, a mile off a, an adequate road?
Yes.
Without, can we do that? Should we do that?
I think you could put regulations in there to, I guess the short answer is yes. I think you could put some regulations in there that could help with that. I mean, even things similar to what we're talking about today could be placed in there.
Require what, a 50-foot width, whatever the street.
The right-of-way width's 50 feet.
The right-of-way width
for
is 50
local
feet,
road.
But then we've got 30 feet coming back to that 50 feet, which in a way makes no sense at all.
I mean, the quick answer to your question is yes, we could. That could be added into the subregs. Yes, sir.
Amazed how many county roads out there, even city roads out there, are substantially under 30 feet of pavement.
Yeah,
I think Sulphur Springs Road's about 22 feet wide all the way through the city limits, except for where it's been widened to the curb and gutter part.
Well, and we were initially going to make the road width wider, and the reason that we came back to saying that 18 feet would be an acceptable road is because that's the width that the county paves to when we were paving a road. And so we didn't feel like it was acceptable to tell somebody that they had to do more than we do as a county. So that wasn't even, I think around 22 was initially what we wanted, and we talked ourselves into 18.
Mr. Terry had some comment, if that's all right with y'all, about the legalities of some of that.
Basically, when it comes to approval or rejection of subdivision plat, as long as the landowner meets all the requirements of the zoning ordinance, whatever they are, and the requirements of subdivision regulations, you have to approve the plat. You can't turn it down because you haven't got anything to turn it down on.
Right.
In view of that, the General Assembly passed a law about, I think, 3 or 4 years ago that just authorized, a planning commission to identify areas of the county or the city where development infrastructure is not adequate for development. And if that process is followed, then presumably that would give you the authority to reject a subdivision plat when the infrastructure is not adequate. Now that would require, I think, that the Planning Commission do some detailed analysis on what actually is required for development and put that as a part of the plan policies and the subdivision regulations. But I think you might have some leverage there.
And I think that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, we want to avoid bad planning.
Yeah, I mean,
And some of that's gone on. It may be a result of RS-15, but it may be a result of bad planning, you know.
yeah.
It may not be totally the RS-15's fault. I don't. I think that's sort of what you're saying in it, Richie.
Yeah, I just, we're gonna have a number of houses by demand. You know, and I thought on the way home the other night, and I've shared it with a couple of them. I've been around a farm all my life. I grew up on one. You know, we've never been full-time farmers, but we've raised cattle, we've cut hay, we've done everything else. And from my house out to, I live on Central Valley Road, and from my house out to 231, there was about 8 farms that raised cattle, either cattle, horses, or whatever. But since then, or now when you leave my house and head that way, you'll find cattle on only one farm. And it's not because of anything other than farms is, you know, unfortunately farms is a dying breed. You know, we're not raising farmers anymore. We've done a pretty good job in our education system of training people not to be farmers, unfortunately. And you know, there's only one of those farms that's become a subdivision, and one the city bought for treated effluent. But everything else, you know, it's just grass. You know, we're cutting hay off our place on our 3 lots. And you know, I'm sitting here thinking of my son's not going to want to do it. I don't think. Hopefully, he'll want to do it part-time and like I am. But it's a pretty good burden when you have a full-time job like I've got, to have to be able to take time off to be able to take care of the farm. I mean, it's great to have, you know, hay growing, and you know, it's pretty to see a fresh cut grass. But you know, I don't see how we're going to save any farms other than, you know, hopefully the land will stay open.
Well, you've right now got 1,525 in the county. That's what we're looking at, somewhere in that number. With a market value of products produced in Rutherford County of somewhere around $24 million. That's what the economic value that agriculture has to Rutherford County. I see Scott sitting back there from the News Journal. I think if you brought a factory in here that was going to bring in 1,500 jobs and produce $24 million each year in economic value, I think that'd make front page, would it, Scott? I know out there in my area we got several that are producing county. Like you said right there, the number has decreased, and as we were talking a while ago about today's modern agriculture, what your farmer numbers are decreasing, but what they're doing, they're increasing in their production and what they're doing. I see you got Will sitting here and Mike too, and they'll tell you that too. When they get ready to plant corn, their bushels have increased tremendously over the years, and that's what's happening there. You're right, the numbers have decreased there. There are ways that we can do those numbers there, but a question I wanted to ask, like in the orange color there, as the infrastructure increases, as it goes out, will that zone merge? I mean, can it increase out with it too?
You're talking the orange area?
Uh-huh.
Yes, I mean, I think that's really the intent of the plan that was done originally and the zoning. When the plan was done, I think at least as I understood it, we understood that, you know, not all areas of the county are ready for a certain density of development. You know, the general consensus was as you get closer to the municipalities, there's an expectation you're going to have more infrastructure and the ability to have greater density in development. As time goes on, like you said, and infrastructure is increased and extended out to these areas, I think it's almost, I'd almost say it's a holding zone in a sense, where right now, do we recognize that these areas may not be the most appropriate to develop? Maybe not right now. In 5 years, they may be. As the infrastructure is extended out to these areas, then you make your changes to the plan, which is why the plan's always an evolving document. It's always something that you keep your eyes on to make sure that it's reflects adequately and accurately what's going on, and then your zoning follows suit. So the answer to your question is yes. I mean, I don't expect this to be the way the zoning map looks. If this is what ends up being approved, I don't expect it to look this way in 5 years. I mean, I expect it to look, you know, there'll be areas where it'll be extended out. There'll be more commercial development, possibly more industrial type development. I mean, that's just understanding this is the way we felt after going through the committee process with the comprehensive plan, but, you know, 2+ year process, and then the zoning. This is what was, you know, what everybody felt was the right approach to go forward with. But we also understood that it's evolving. You know, I think there's a misconception out there that people think that once their property is zoned, let's say it's zoned this way, that once it's zoned that way, that's the way it's going to be zoned for the next 25 years. That is just simply not the case. I mean, this can be amended through the same process that we're going through right now, essentially. It's a little different as far as time frames and everything, but as far as rezoning property, that's not going to change. People can still make requests for zoning like they do today. None of that's changing.
Well, I know out in the Eagleville area, they're in the process of trying to get sewer out there. And once that comes in, I can see that area out there possibly having a change as far as what they'll be requesting, what they're asking for there. And as Rhonda was saying there, we want that planning to happen out there correctly too. But I can see that area, once they get a sewer going in the Eagleville area, with the school that they have out there and the dedication of that community for that school and that community, and once they get that going out there, you could see some real growth. Because I was just driving in there the other day with the available land that's located out that way. You could see a whole lot of change for there. Right now, it's not. It's not there.
Right. And as planners, I want to clear up any misconception that there may be as far as my staff is concerned. I mean, we're not anti-growth at all. I mean, we want to see responsible growth. That's usually what I tell people. We're not saying we don't want the county to grow and we're trying to stymie this growth by instituting the zoning plan. That is not at all what our intention was. Again, it's just understanding that right now there are some areas that are more suited for denser development than others are right now. But again, over time, that will change. And that's why these plans, the comprehensive plan and the zoning document, are not static documents set in concrete. They are meant to be changed over time. And that's part of our job as planners is to kind of evaluate how that's going and to, you know, adjust as time goes on. And that's your job as planning commissioners to, you know, help guide that as well.
Maybe I'm missing something, but referring to Eagleville, and they get their sewer system, which they desperately need for the infrastructure's already there, the buildings are already there.
Right.
Right now, if we don't do anything, they can build many houses they want on 15,000 square foot lots.
No, you're talking the area surrounding. You're not talking obviously Eagleville City has their own, but you're talking
area outside of Eagleville.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in our, you know, our jurisdiction.
Okay.
And but even with this Chapter 4, Section 404, it's the same thing. It's 15,000 square foot lots if they got sewer. So we haven't changed anything as far as Eagleville. If we approve this.
Well, assuming, again, I mean, that goes back to assuming that infrastructure is available. You know, assuming they get the sewer,
Yeah.
assuming they get, the adequate water and everything. And quite frankly, if they get a sewer system, and I know that's something they've been talking about for a while and have been trying to move forward with, those are the kind of things that would make us want to go back and revisit the plan, revisit the zoning of that area. Those kind of things, those are the kind of things that we have to stay on top of as planners.
I know, but I'm just asking a question. But what have we changed? If we approve this, the recommendation right here today, as far as where we are today with Eagleville, if they were to get a sewer system up and running in 2 years' time, what they could do compared to if we just left it alone at R15. I mean, we haven't changed anything, have we?
Well, it
There's
depends.
still
It depends on the
15,000 foot lots,
property.
by right.
Right. It depends on the property first of all, and depends on how far the sewer is extended out.
If
If
the
they're
sewer's
going to.
available.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of variables in that.
But with sewer on
but-
site, it's the same now and with the proposed change
If
for today.
infrastructure was available. Now, I think the yellow area also reflects the reality that infrastructure is not going to be available in all these areas.
Yeah.
So those areas that could support a higher density development based on this proposal here would be allowed to do that. Those areas that didn't have it would still be limited at 1 unit an acre. So, I mean, if that whole area had the sewer, the water,
Have it
everything,
either sewer or suitable soils.
or that could go to a half acre
Yeah, they
in
go,
that
they
situation.
go to
right.
22,000. And realistically, you don't get a house on a septic system, which I said earlier, on 15,000 foot lot anyway. It just doesn't fit. So I'm just wondering what we're actually changing, you know.
Well, in that aspect, I don't think you're changing anything.
Yeah.
But on the flip side is, if a half a mile over where there's no infrastructure and there's a suitable site and they want to build a subdivision, they have a right to do that too. And
We need to
again,
look at that
you
when
go
we get-
back to the point.
but there
we
are
don't have the infrastructure to sustain that.
There are properties within the orange area that have that
Exactly.
same problem.
Exactly.
I don't know if we ought to just burden the people in the outer area to fix our planning problem. We need to look strongly at our subdivision regulations, because there are places in very close proximity to the municipalities that can't support development. And so we need to look at those, but that's a different story than
And when
than
you,
this map.
when you say that, you mean from an infrastructure.
From an infrastructure standpoint, you
not
know.
water, they
Yeah, the
probably
roads
would
too
have an
narrow,
adequate
whatever. I
soil
mean,
for a step
I don't know if
system.
we want to get all as far as saying what school's full, because it gets very political very quickly on where we're approving subdivision.
Yeah, and
But you
that's-
could go as far as that.
Right. Oh, yeah, and
But I'm talking about
yeah.
road width and things
Right.
like that.
And the state law, I think, would allow you to go that far. I mean, Bill can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you start running into with schools is it's such a dynamic moving target that,
They're
one
changing
day,
school zones
exactly,
constantly and
right.
everything,
The
yeah.
school zones change, the capacity at schools change almost daily in some instances, and what may be okay today, 2 weeks from now may not be, and vice versa. So that's a difficult topic.
Which is all the reason to have a comprehensive plan.
Exactly.
Doug, how often will this map be reassessed, as the growth? I mean, how often would y'all need to do that?
Well, the plan, let me kind of answer that too. The plan map, generally, the planning literature that we read recommends at least every 5 years. Now, that doesn't mean you have to wait 5 years to do it. It's really something that's ongoing. Kind of like Will's example, if Eagleville comes up with a new sewer system and they're going to extend it out to some of those areas, something like that would prompt us to do a revision to that study that was done. The zoning, the same way, really. Once this zoning map is approved, it could be amended the next month. Yeah.
So every time y'all reassess it, you bring it back before us?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we can't, anything that we change, and now I'm just talking specifically about the zoning map at this point. Any changes that we make to the zoning map will go through the similar process as we do now. We have a public hearing before the Planning Commission about a rezoning. Now, there won't be conditional uses anymore based on what we're proposing in here. You'll just be looking at straight zoning at that point. But it requires a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and it requires that recommendation to go forward to the full county commission. It requires their approval to change it. And that's how state law handles that. There are no changes in that regard. The way that we're handling zoning is changing a little bit as far as no conditional uses at the planning commission level anymore. That's all going to be handled through the BZA through what's called a special exception. It's really the same thing. But the planning commission will just be looking at whether the property you feel, based on the uses permitted in that zoning district, do you feel that's appropriate based on the area, based on the recommendations of the comprehensive plan, those kind of things. But this map, once it's approved, it can be amended just like it can be amended now, so, under our current zoning map.
These suggestions by the staff, the 3 bullet points, especially the top 2 bullet points, is in essence a compromise, because that's the way I'm reading it. What's been suggested is the down zoning, and this gives folks the opportunity to get the exact same zoning that they have right now, depending upon those conditions existing.
That's correct.
So, that's kind of sort of a compromise. The other thing that keeps running through my mind is, Pettis made a point about farms, and those of us that are native to the county remember farms. And things are changed, and will continue to change. And I'm just thinking that the property, no matter where it is in the county, maybe outside of the incorporated areas, they may be zoned to R15 right now, but the use is not R15. It's something else. And that's the real difference that we're talking about, is making that change. Farms will still be farms. And I think some farmers will even have the opportunity to say, I won't mind the zoning changed on my farm to agriculture. They'll have that opportunity, I think.
Yes.
And some may not want that, but wouldn't this compromise give those that maybe wanted to develop it in the future the right to kind of do what they're doing right now, if those things existed, which would be maybe a better plan than what we have now? That's kind of my questions, and I thought it was a pretty decent compromise. Our consultants kind of sit through a lot of public meetings and public hearings and listen to some criticisms that related to the downsizing and all of those kinds of things. I'm just wondering if there's any comments that you guys would like to make as far as, I don't need to say in defense of this plan, but just in general, yeah, just some clarification as to how you view this versus what we have right now.
Yeah, and actually, Ms. Kendall has brought a presentation, and it was brought up today again by Mr. Robinson about the land use model and how those numbers were derived, and she's going to address that whenever we're finished, at least with this portion, asking questions of staff, and we can always come back to that as well. And Mr. Terry, I'm sure will have some comments if he'd like to make regarding zoning. He has quite a bit of experience in zoning matters, and I would certainly defer to him. But if you just bear with me just a second, I don't know if Michelle, you had any comments ahead of time before?
No, not ahead of time. I think I pulled together just a few slides to kind of talk through some of the issues that have been raised and some of the processes that we used. I had a whole lot, and then I stripped it back a little bit because I figure I probably went a little bit overboard. I have probably about 12 slides or so that I'll talk through with you, and I'm certainly open to any other questions y'all may have. I'm happy to answer them. No, it's the PowerPoint. Oh, it's already open at the bottom. There we go. The green? Okay. All right, again, there's been a lot of issues raised. This addresses, I think, most of them. But again, like I said, I'm happy to answer any specific questions that y'all have. One of the things that was addressed, and I know that you've seen this before, but I thought it was important to point out again, was that this really was an open process. We've been working on this for 2.5, probably going on 3 years now. We started with a lot of outreach to find out where we're at now. When we start our planning processes, whatever kind of planning processes they may be, we kind of look at the milestones. Where are we now? Look at what's going on in the community, what things have worked well, what things haven't worked well. And then we get the pointer? technology is not my forte. So we kind of start here in the purple. Where are we now? And this is how we started this plan with the comprehensive plan process. We did a lot of outreach, stakeholder interviews, focus groups, steering committee meetings, and this extended for a wide variety of time. We did them in a lot of different areas of the community. Doug and Elizabeth did even more as well, just to kind of be out there to give people the opportunity to give their input. We looked at, as part of that, we looked at existing conditions, we looked at the plans, we did a market analysis, looked at opportunities and constraints, and looked at that baseline scenario. After you assess, okay, where are we now, you look at where are we going? Where do we want to be? You know, that's kind of the vision that you're setting forth. You know, where does Rutherford County want to be in 25 years? Again, we continued with the public outreach process. We did the visioning, we did the charrette, we continued with the steering committee. And I think it's important to know, too, that the steering committee was very, very actively engaged. They represented a wide variety of interests across the community, and they really spoke from a variety of different viewpoints. So that was really helpful as we were going through this, to kind of hear those different vantage points. During that process, we developed the goals, objectives, and policies. And again, we developed these through what we had heard with the, when we were out in the public. We brought those back to the public, gave everyone the opportunity to respond to them, and we kind of based the rest of our plan on that. We continued with we're in kind of this phase right now. How do we get there? Looking at, we had adopted the comp plan, now we're looking at the zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations, which are really, how do you implement your vision? The vision statement that we ended up with when we went through this process is what's on the screen here. It says Rutherford County seeks sustainable growth that protects our natural and historic resources while preserving our values, qualities, and culture. I think it's really important, and this was something that Doug touched on earlier. Nowhere in here is anyone trying to stop growth. We're all very supportive of it, but what we want to do is channel it to the areas where it makes the most sense, where there's infrastructure already, where the soils can support it, where things just make sense to preserve it instead of a haphazard pattern. And that was something that we heard a lot throughout the course of our public meetings. People said, we're for growth, but we want to be able to preserve the prime farmland, and we want to be able to, you know, have our children be able to go to the schools so they don't have to be bused, you know, 50 miles away, 100 miles away. They have to have some sort of resources so that they understand that growth is going to happen. People are here because growth is happening, and people aren't trying to stop that. You're just trying to put it in a way that makes sense. The scenario development process is something that's really come into question, and this tends to happen anytime you have a model that tries to put quantitative numbers to something, and that's really what we tried to do with Community Viz. And I will say, too, Community Viz is not something that is frequently used. A lot of times comprehensive plans are developed based on policies. You don't always try and put quantitative numbers to them, but we tried to do that kind of as a secondary look to say, this is what we think the impacts could be when you're looking at this scenario versus this scenario. This is a tool to look at what the differences are between them. So what we did is we looked at too many tools here. We took the comprehensive plan, the visions, and the goals, and we looked at 3 different scenarios. One was the base case. If you do nothing, if you continue to grow like you've been growing, this is what's going to happen. Then we developed the suburban belt scenario, which is ultimately the preferred scenario of the steering committee that we've been looking at on the screen up here with some modifications since. And then an urban infill scenario, which was taking it a step even further, developing those densities a little more tightly in. The Community Viz model looks at measures of effectiveness and suitability factors, and what you do is you set up what's important to you in this model. So we said, okay, based on the goals, these are some of the things that people were saying that they wanted, and that makes the most sense of the land. So looking at how much land is consumed, how much prime farmland is consumed, what types of land uses there are now and what types of land uses you want to see, you know, where there's water and sewer, how close the property are when they're being developed to schools. Are they close to major intersections, kind of getting at your transportation impacts? Are they close to parks? Does it fit within the urban growth boundary that's been established? Are they close to the centers? Are they away from areas of floodplains, excessive slope, and rare species? And at the end of the day, what we decided on was the scenario that you've been seeing in front of you. Again, the Community Viz model, If any of you are familiar with ArcView or ArcMap, it's a mapping tool. It has quantifiable data behind it, which is really great. So you can take concepts and put them on a map. We use it a lot in planning. It's kind of a planner's version of CAD that engineers would use. And it allocates population to areas. It doesn't project. You have to tell it, this is the population that I see in the future, and then it uses those numbers. It doesn't come up with its own. It just allocates it based on those suitability factors that we were just talking about to where the land is most suitable for that development. And something else that has been raised, what it does, it allocates as much development to each parcel as possible before it moves on to the next. So it doesn't take just a tiny little sliver. If you can get 3 units per acre out of a particular parcel, it'll give you 3 units per acre and then move on. So you're not getting kind of haphazard little pieces here and there. And again, it's a tool to show the relative differences. Nobody knows what the population is going to be in 25 years. We took the regional growth projections, which are a tool, again, they're projections, and then it shows you what those differences in the scenarios could be. This isn't to say we're going to use exactly this many acres and exactly this many acres, because we all know that that's not possible, but it just sets them relative to each other. For all of the scenarios, we did use the same. This was a question that arose also. When we started this project, we decided in some comprehensive plans we'll do this. Sometimes they'll set a high scenario for growth, a low scenario, and a mid-range scenario. We said, no, we're going to take this population and employment projections that have been established for the region already, and we're going to go with those and use those for each of the different scenarios. So you're comparing apples to apples when you're looking at population and employment growth. And again, the same was used for each of them. So about 410,000 was the population we were looking at in 2035, which is about 164,000 households. And then jobs, which is something that hasn't really been talked about, but is a major factor in there. We're looking at trying to provide for 225,000 jobs by 2035.
The percentage of people working there parallel the percentage of the population that's working now?
They,
is there a retirement factor in there or anything like that?
yeah, when the region develops their projections, those factors are taken into account. And we took them at face value. We didn't try and debate what they are, but yes, when projections are done, they take different trends and things like that into account.
Michelle, what was the source of the regional projections?
It was the Nashville MPO, which each of the counties and the counties and cities in the 5+ county area are a part of.
And when did they generate those?
A couple years ago. Yeah, I could find out the exact date, but they're recent.
It's the most recent
It's been
projections.
within the last couple of years.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's 2 years ago.
Again, something that we've had considerable discussions about the numbers that we put out there for the land to be consumed. We were saying in the base case scenario, potentially 200,000 acres, additional acres of land could be consumed to account for the households and the jobs that are going to be required. Something that hasn't really been discussed but is important to note, and it kind of gets to what y'all were saying, you can't develop as many acres as are zoned based on a lot of different factors. The land just isn't suitable for it. So when you look at how much land is being consumed, it looks at areas of floodplains and areas in excess of 25% slope, and it just takes those out. So if you've got a parcel that's 100 acres, but you could really only develop on 2, well, it's saying, yes, that whole parcel is consumed because that's practical. You may be only developing on 2 acres. These numbers don't make sense, I know that, but just for an example, you may be only developing 2 acres of that, but the whole parcel is shown as consumed because it's not developable. And that was consistent across all of the scenarios. Also, in the suburban belt and the urban, they were even a little more strict with where you could develop. They looked at wildlife management areas, staying out of those, staying out of the National Heritage Inventory Program, rare species, things like that, and also not developing on areas of cultural or historic resources. And again, this gets to the bottom here. Consumed land looks at what's really needed for that population and employment, along with the land that's just unsuitable for development. These are just the numbers, again, showing this is what we were projecting for the 163,000 households. and here's your different kinds of employment, retail, and the bottom numbers on each of these are existing. And then it shows you the top parts of the bar are what's additional that would be added. And again, that's the same slide, just shown a little bit differently. Here's our existing households, about 93,000, projected to go up to about 163,000 in 2035. And similarly with employment, existing is 135,000. And then we're looking to provide space for about 90 or so thousand, the difference between 225 and 135 in the future. And again, this is just the way that CommunityViz and the GIS takes the numbers and shows them on a map. This is the developed areas shown as existing.
Developed, is that less, I mean, more than one house per 5 acres, or what defines development there? Or is that an approved subdivision, or what is it?
Just what's existing. It didn't look into anything that was already approved or anything that was in the development process. So where there's houses or jobs now. And again, we took the base case from the MPO's
Yeah, what I'm trying to determine is that showing subdivisions, or is it showing a house on 5 acres or a house on 15 acres that's essentially
both
a residence? So it shows both. Okay.
The house on 15 acres could be a future subdivision.
That's true too.
You know, and so that land isn't actually used to develop yet, of course.
But if it came out of
a high-rise apartment building built on it 50 years now, so
if it came out of a 500-acre farm, in your mind and my mind, it has been somewhat developed.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to determine there.
And something that I didn't point out too, but the numbers that we're talking about are countywide. They're not just in the unincorporated areas. They're for the entire Rutherford County. And then using CommunityViz, this is the base case of the land that would be consumed in the future. And when we looked at this and looked at the numbers of consumption, this is where we started with the alternative development scenario, saying this is a lot of land and a lot of prime farmland and a lot of impacts potentially. And maybe we could do a little bit better job planning for that. Maybe we can bring the growth in a little bit more into the urban growth boundaries that were established. You can zone some areas higher so you can get those intensities there, and then zone some areas lower so that you kind of spread it out so that where there is infrastructure and kind of like you're talking about, you know, where is there adequate infrastructure? Where should these developments really be happening? This was kind of the starting point for why we looked at those, the urban infill and the suburban belt scenarios. And this is where I've stopped in this presentation. I didn't really go into the scenarios a lot, but like I said, I'm happy if there's any other questions, anything that I haven't addressed that you feel that I should address that has come up in the past.
I've already answered, but what do we already have on the books with developed, well, I guess it would be approved, yeah. Not developed lots yet because the house isn't on it, but approved lots.
You're talking, okay. Now, this is just unincorporated county area, and we keep up a lot inventory here that we update monthly from building permit data and everything that basically, when we started it, we went back to 2004 and just said, we're not gonna go any earlier than this. We had to draw the line somewhere. Currently, there's about, give or take 10, 20 lots, about 1,350 lots that have been approved, recorded, are on, I mean, could be built. Someone could come in today and build a building permit for them.
1,350.
Roughly. I would say somewhere between 1,300, 1,350 right now.
All of those have approved infrastructure in place.
All those plats are recorded, approved, ready for building permit. Now that's, again, is just in the unincorporated area. That doesn't count Murfreesboro, Smyrna, Laverne, Eagleville. So
how many more are approved, and we keep renewing the plat that hadn't had any dirt moved on them? You got any idea?
Yeah, about 700 lots at this point. Again, that's since 2004. I mean, that's where we drew the line. So.
Agree. You get to the zoning ordinance, I'd like to back up a bit and talk a little bit about planning. The idea that planning is new is not true. Planning is as old as civilization almost. The first city plans came out of ancient Greece and the Roman Empire. That's where our grid system of streets came from. So it's a long line of history. In this country, the first planned city was New Hartford, Connecticut, and it was done in the 1600s. The plan of Charleston was done in 1680. The plan of Savannah was done in 1733. Now, Charleston and Savannah have developed very carefully according to that plan. In the old sections, they're both National Historic Districts, and they're enormous tourist attractions. The real estate values in Charleston and Savannah and those old parts of the town that were built according to those old plans are astronomical. So in some senses, it worked. But in another sense, the plan is only one piece of the whole picture, as we've talked here. As cities developed in this country over time, it was discovered that many problems occurred even though they had a city plan. The plan of Manhattan Island, the heart of New York, was done, I think, in about 1811. But over time, the many problems that developed in New York City because of the construction of high-rise tenements, too many people packed in the tenements, industries located right next to the tenements with, at that time, all kinds of pollutants coming out of the development of the industries. And then the final factor, I think, that was the construction of really large, tall buildings that shut out sunlight. So those are the factors that led to the first zoning ordinance in the United States, which was in the zoning ordinance in New York City in 1916. And it was to try to correct those problems that occurred, even though they might have had a plan. From its inception, it was controversial, of course, because it affects private property. It will always be controversial. There's no way to get around it. The test case for whether or not zoning was in fact legal in this country came in 1926 with a Supreme Court decision that said that the zoning of property and dividing the city into districts with different uses in districts was in fact constitutional, did not constitute a taking of property. There have been a number of Supreme Court decisions since then that reached the same conclusions. However, how the city or the county applies the zoning regulations on a specific piece of property can be significant and can be a taking of property. That's the issue that comes up all the time. So, but it's on a case-by-case, lot-by-lot, property-by-property situation, so that in general, the idea of zoning is in fact constitutional. It is not a taking of property. The application on a particular lot can be. So to get to where we are here, the zoning ordinance is actually two parts. You've got the text, which is this, and you got the map. They go together. I haven't heard a whole lot of commentary on the text. There have been some issues that have come up, such as the distance regulations for rock quarries, such as the amount of open space required in PUD, and those have been addressed in one way or another, can be addressed. That's the normal procedure. You propose a draft of a zoning ordinance, and then you go through this process to adapt it to get what this community needs, and that's your vital role. The map is another issue. We knew that would be controversial. I'm sure all of us did. But the idea for the map with the vast yellow area came out of the plan. And those concepts that were talked about in the plan brought that about, the preservation of farmland, keeping open space, and meeting those kinds of objectives for the people that thought that there was something that needed to be done in that area. So that's how that map evolved. I agree with Mr. Reed. We plan for development. We don't plan for farms. And protecting farmland really can't be done through zoning, solely through zoning. In order to protect farmland solely through zoning, you would probably be looking at a lot size minimum of 25 to 50 acres, and in strictly an agricultural zone. And of course, that would be challenged and might be considered to be a taking of property. So you've got to preserve farmland through a variety of programs. The Greenbelt law that he mentioned was done just for that purpose, to give farmland a tax reduction if it's actually active farmland. And that may have helped at some point in time. There is a program called Transfer of Development Rights that you can institute locally to try to transfer development rights from a farm piece of property to a developed piece of property. A law was passed, is in the process of being passed this year. It's passed both houses now, that will authorize cities and counties to purchase development rights. So these kind of things have to be worked together in order to protect farmland, and it's a complicated process. The idea that that the downzoning of property is a taking is also not correct. There's been decisions, again, at the court level, at the highest court level, that downzoning, particularly if it's based upon a well-conceived plan, is not illegal. And it's not a taking of property unless it's proven to be on each piece of property. As I said, the application of the regulations to a specific piece of property can be a taking, but it has to be proven. So that's basically how we got to where we are now. Going back to what we said early on, for my responsibility here was to try to create a zoning ordinance that did certain things, to create a land classification system in the zoning ordinance so that similar uses are grouped in similar activities. Now that can be questioned, but that was the system chosen by staff here. We discontinued the use of conditional uses by the county legislative body and installed the special exception system for consideration by the Board of Zoning Appeals, and that's in accordance with state law. One of the important things to consider are those uses that you want to have reviewed as a special exceptions and how they impact the area where they be located. So that's an important aspect that's in the text. Doesn't affect the map necessarily. We created special character districts for the different sections of the county in accordance with the plan. Again, a lot of these zoning considerations in the zoning maps are based upon the plan. And we cleared up the administrative procedures of the old zoning ordinance and to put them in this one. So that was our basic purpose in doing the text. The map is more closely related to the plan. So I don't know whether that justifies where you are or not, but that's how we got here. And the issue of what you raised is very important, whether or not a subdivision or any development can be denied if it's properly zoned. And of course, you know the answer to that. If it's properly zoned and if you meet all standards in your subdivision regulations, you can't turn it down. And that's why there is a need for the you need to look at what those characteristics are, what those criteria are that would justify and trigger a rezoning of property to a higher density. And that's one thing that we might want to look at. Again, the law says that the Planning Commission can identify areas that are appropriate for development and inappropriate for development because of those issues. So we might want to identify the various criteria that could be applied to whether or not a particular piece of property is suitable for development.
When you're doing that, but you've got to have that in your regulations as to what those criteria are.
Yes, you need to write them down.
You can't just haphazardly say, we don't like that, it's not smart. I mean, there has to be criteria there, and that's what we're trying to address.
There has to be rational criteria, and it has to be written down.
And that logically would be in the subdivision regulations where that verbiage would take place.
Yes, could be a reference from the plan, but the regulations are in the subdivision standards, so it would apply.
When you say identify areas, we could set some criteria to identify not specific areas, but, you know, but say if the road is under a certain width, then the water's this,
Exactly.
the slope's that, and what. And so it wouldn't be a geographical area on the map. It could be site-specific if those check marks were matched when you got to an individual site.
I think you could do both.
Yeah.
You know, if one section of the county is totally without infrastructure, you could,
I would just be pretty leery of going out and stamping a spot, like condemning a spot and saying, but I really like the idea of being able to say, if this aren't there, then that gives us the grounds to say that this is not suitable.
Right.
And a half a mile down the road, or the piece of property that backs up to it has frontage to another road, could be totally appropriate, and it could be even an adjoining piece of property, but you know, but as long as we had those tools. I think that's been our most heartburn for 10 years.
A lot of these would
up
be
here.
criteria that could be corrected. You know,
Oh, yeah.
the road widened leading to the
Oh, yeah.
initiation of the
Another,
subdivision.
another issue that has been raised here today that you need to think about too is whether or not the county can require a developer to extend a road that needs to be improved from one point to the development. And that's very, as Doug said, that's pretty hard to do because I think the case law on that is that the county could not require a developer to provide a road just for that development because it's needed for the general community. So the developer you wouldn't be able to require a developer to build a road that was beyond what was the need of that particular development.
In other words, you can't, if you're on a 15-foot road, you could say, we need to widen this to 25 feet.
Mm-hmm.
But you couldn't say, we need to make this a 4-lane, because we might need a 4-lane there 50 years from now.
No.
That would be, that's
the county's responsibility.
scenario you're speaking of there.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta be careful of making the guy widen the road, then his next door neighbor sits there and rides coattails after it's already built.
Right.
You know, he's just sitting there waiting for the road to
So
get
that's the
built.
need to tie the infrastructure requirement into the planning requirement and into the zoning classifications
So what you're saying, it has to be done very, very carefully.
carefully.
Doug, the 3 bullets that you proposed in RL, does any of that come into play already in RM? And I'm specifically looking at like the fire protection.
Currently, just what's in the subdivision regulations right now as far as, well, like that development we saw, one of the plats we saw in the meeting today, where, of course, he was building larger lot subdivisions, but even he had to install a fire hydrant unless he got a waiver to it. So in the sense that the requirement is there, all lots have to be within 1,000 feet. And if not, then, you know, they have to ask for a waiver. That's really what we have currently. Nothing like what you're seeing right here.
Do you think it needs to be, or do you think it's fine as is?
I think something like this would be good in the new regulations.
Okay.
And will you comment again on where we are on the subdivision regulation rewrite or revamp?
Right. We have I mean, it's kind of, I'd call it a working draft at this point. We really haven't done a whole lot with it because really a lot of what's going to go, at least a portion of what's going to go into subdivision regulations is going to be dependent on what comes out here. So we haven't gotten a finished document at this point. Now, whenever we finalize what's going to happen with the zoning, I don't think it'll take a lot of time to do that. In the subdivision regulations, kind of what I envision happening is whenever this is finally approved, within the next month or so after that, we'll distribute the subdivision regulations for your review to begin that process.
Okay.
Now, that process is a little bit different in the sense that that is a document that stays at the Planning Commission. That's something that you have the authority to approve or disapprove. That once it's approved here, it doesn't go forward to the County Commission. That's something that is your responsibility as state law mandates. So that process may be a little less time-consuming in the fact that there's not an extra step to go through.
Mm-hmm.
It still does require a 30-day public hearing notice before the Planning Commission that we'll have to put into the newspaper. But that's a document that stays here as far as that.
Are the subdivision regulations also the document we use to determine or suggest whether we use vinyl or brick or percentage of the two? I mean,
that's more something you would find in the zoning, or maybe some sort of a design review manual or something like that.
All right, so that's still a separate case.
Yeah, I'm trying to think just on I don't think we have anything like that in the subdivision regulations. And typically, even in those areas that do have some sort of design review, subdivision regulations are dealing more with the property itself, not the construction of what's on the property.
Right.
So I don't think you would typically find that there.
Did we ever find a way along those lines? Did we ever find a way to incorporate the Christiana land use plan into any of this? Because I know they had some aesthetic guidelines that they were interested in.
No, and the reason being is, as staff, I don't think we really ever felt comfortable about trying to mandate something that was done for a particular area of the county, countywide. Something that we'd like to do whenever we get the zoning approved is, and we've talked about this, is go back to those smaller communities, you know, your Christianas, your Las Casas, your Miltons, those kind of areas.
Isn't that kind of what the nodes do?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to kind of go back and kind of look at those areas more closely and determine, is this something that they would be interested in? They may not be, and if they're not, that's fine. But those areas, the areas that you would consider downtown Christiana, Las Casas, whatnot, they're different animals in the sense that, you know, their lots are typically a lot smaller than what you would see in a regular area out in the county, kind of a rural area. They're more concentrated. They've got different challenges than some of the other areas we're looking at, and I think deserve more careful scrutiny. And if they would like some sort of design review, I mean, I think that's something we could certainly look into, but I wouldn't be comfortable saying this is what came out of Christiana Buchanan land study back in, you know, about, 8-10 years ago or so, and we want to apply this everywhere else around the county. So
yeah, I didn't mean
that
to
was
apply
why.
to
Right.
I meant build on the work they'd already done.
Yeah, well,
for that
yes.
community. Yeah.
Right, and yeah, I mean, those were things that, you know, as we did a comprehensive plan, you know, we looked at the existing plans that were on the ground already. So those recommendations, I think we could use those when we look at Christiana in that area. I think we could use those as a kind of a starting point to say, you know, this is what was recommended originally. How do you feel about these things? Do you want them to change? Do you want them the same? Those kind of things. See how that would play out from there.
And so, will that document have any authority for, let's say that Christiana, and we talked about using it in the nodes. I mean, well, where's that document come into play, and how do we rely on it, and how do we hold anybody to developing to that standard?
Well, the plan, the small area plan in and of itself, I don't think is binding like a zoning ordinance is, or even, well, the comprehensive plan is not binding either unless the county commission were to vote on it. I think we would use it kind of like we're using the comprehensive plan at this point, again, as a guide to help us go forward. If the people out in these different areas would like to see some of those protections in the document, then I think we would codify those and make them new sections in the zoning. And then from there, they would become enforceable. And at least that's what our plan is, our long-range plan is for that.
But you'll have, this will be on down the road, and you'll have an outreach to the property owners. And
absolutely.
we'll have a community meeting.
Yes.
And if they want to set up design regulations for commercial buildings or houses or whatever within that zone.
It would be up to them. You're absolutely correct. Yeah, we would.
And they can say, hey, we're not interested.
That's fine with us. Yes. No, that would be something we would like to see from a staff standpoint, is being driven completely by the community itself. If we go in there and we start working through this and they say, we want A, B, and C, but the rest of it we don't care about, that's how we'll write it up. And then if we go up to, say, Las Casas or Milton, they say, well, we kind of like what Christiana did, but we want to include all these things they didn't. Then they would have their own area. You know, there'd be separate, I guess there'd be overlays at that point. It's kind of what we're envisioning.
Yeah, the way it's set up now, we created special character districts within the text of the zoning ordinance, but we haven't put them on the map.
It's very limited. There's a few parcels zoned, but
they're based
general
on
standards.
the information in this plan.
Right.
But the more detailed plan that Doug's talking about may result in those being changed.
Well, and the reason I ask, I think about at Las Casas what Johnny McFarland did. You know, he built a drugstore / office building there, and his design was very, very popular. In other words, he set a very high standard for the rest of the community if they should so choose to follow it, you know?
Right.
And I think if you can set that kind of design, it would allow for some commercial zoning out there. I think outside of that, it becomes very difficult.
And that's, again, we would want that to be driven by the community, and that's something we figure we'll do in-house. I don't think that's something we'll necessarily have to, as much as we like Bill and Michelle, I know that's probably not something we would
Right.
rely on them for. We would take care of that, you know, as staff projects.
Do we need a motion to approve these staff recommendations for
Well,
today?
I guess at this point, what we need is, what would you like us to do going forward? I mean, we've had a lot of good discussion today. You've heard a lot of comments from both Michelle and Bill regarding the plan and the land use modeling, how that came about. You've heard from staff. I mean, at this point, I guess we'd like to know what you want to do. We think we've done what was asked of us, and if we need to do more, that's fine. Just let us know.
Did anybody contact Mr. Bonner, Charlie Montgomery, as I remember?
I did.
And
I
will
thought.
it affect the appraisal value at all?
Well, I thought he was going to be here today because he wrote down the time and everything that was going on. I don't want to speak for him, but my understanding of what came out of that was, as far as the appraisal value for tax purposes for what he does, that it really doesn't matter to him if it's zoned 1 unit an acre or 3 units an acre. It has no effect on that.
There's more of an equalization.
Right, and he tried to explain that to me a little bit, how that they do it by large block basically is what they do. I'm not going to pretend to understand exactly how they did that, but that's the information he relayed to me. I was again hoping he'd be here today to kind of go through some
commercial,
of
they raise your taxes. It's like if it was on lesser, they lower them.
Yeah, and my experience working with that, and when you bring that up, Will, that's a good point. But when I was working for the city of Murfreesboro, of course, I worked on annexation studies while I was there, and I frequently took phone calls from the assessor's office about zoning of property and everything. It was always my understanding at that point, at least, that when they did their assessment of the property, that they are looking at the use of the property more so than they're looking at the zoning of the property. So even if the property had been zoned for commercial purposes, if it was being used as a single-family home, just like a non-conforming use, they still taxed it as a house. They didn't tax it commercially. Now that, again, that was my understanding at the time. That may have changed. It's been a while since I've been with Murfreesboro now, but and there's we've gone through a couple different assessors since that point, but that was always my understanding. But after talking to Mr. Boner, that is the information that he gave me. But again, any more in depth than that, I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth. So.
Doug, do you still have a place on the website I was thinking you did that was kind of a Q&A, or did we only take comments in, or did we put answers back out there about?
I think we posted the comments. Yeah, we did have and that actually the comment form is still open. You can actually still get to it off even the county's homepage. And if I remember correctly, we did post the responses to the comments we received on the website, on our website.
There's a place I think it would be really appropriate for maybe you and Michelle to come up with just a brief narrative, like a paragraph, that explained her presentation. And if you want to hang her whole presentation out there, that'd be fine too. But I think it would be helpful for people to understand how those numbers were used, because I know there's been a lot of confusion around that. And I wouldn't want any of her information to be, taken out of context or
Right.
misquoted. I think it'd be better if it came straight from you all and laid it out exactly how those numbers came to be. Because I'm like you, I understood everything you were saying. Not sure I would be very eloquent trying to repeat it for somebody else.
Right. And we can certainly do that.
Well, I came to the meeting today prepared to make a motion in my mind, I was gonna make a motion to put the whole county in the orange zone instead of the yellow zone, but I'm pretty happy with this, to tell you the truth. I don't think this substantially is gonna affect anybody negatively any more than what there is now. I mean, it takes in the 22,000 square foot range to do a house on a septic system, which I'm saying that for the third time now during this meeting. So with that, if we need a motion to approve this, I'll make a motion that we approve the staff recommendations.
So you basically, as I hear you saying, you're asking us to incorporate this
Yes,
into the
into
zoning
the plan,
document.
yeah.
Okay.
Everybody understand the motion?
Yeah, I would second that.
We have a second. Any other discussion on that?
And for clarification, this is what we're including.
Page, yeah.
You have a second?
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Opposed?
No.
Motion passes.
So we'll go ahead and incorporate this into the zoning document. And I guess from this point, I'll leave it up to you as how you want to move forward from here. If you want to consider this as a full document at the next night meeting, if you want to have another public hearing, it's really up to the commission at this point.
Can I make one more question or statement? Just to make sure I'm clear. And I'm going to try and break this down in the second grade level because that's the level I need to comprehend at. We obviously need let me rephrase that. A comprehensive plan is needed for logical and strategic growth.
Yes.
Not haphazard, willy-nilly, like it's been for 24 years. Based on what we talked about today, am I understanding that even though there may be property in the yellow zone that would be suitable for a subdivision, that still would be allowed if it would meet certain criteria that would come out of the subdivision regulations and we have to define that criteria. But we're not stopping anybody from putting a subdivision out in the yellow or in the orange for that matter, right?
That's correct.
All right. So, but it would give us the power to deny a particular subdivision in the yellow area based on infrastructure needs, noise pollution, air pollution, whatever the criteria may be.
I mean, it would actually in both. I mean, countywide, it would give you the ability to.
And we would legally, Mr. Terry, we would legally have the ability, once the subdivision regulations are agreed on and approved, we legally would have the ability to say no to a development if it did not meet certain criteria.
That particular provision has never been tested because it's fairly new, but that's my impression, yes.
Okay, all right.
Then why leave the yellow?
This puts you right there.
Well, I mean, Rich, I know we've all talked about, the reasons behind that. And again, I think from my standpoint, it comes back to almost a phasing situation. There are just some areas right now that don't need that kind of density on the property. In time, they might. And again, that's something we evaluate as time goes on. I mean, honestly, we could sit here and debate back and forth. I mean, and you know this, and I know how you feel. You know how I feel, and that's fine. We just there are two sides to the coin.
Well, I think we do it so the county doesn't look like that 20 years from now.
Those numbers are false. Yeah, but I don't buy that. It ain't happened yet.
Where do we go from here? A stated goal, and it was my stated goal that we'd be ready maybe to, for some type of a recommendation or even a motion at our next 6 o'clock meeting. And I'm not sure that we're there. It was just a goal, okay, to kind of try to get us moving. So where do we go from here? And I think that was your question too, Doug.
Right. I mean, we've had 2 public hearings now. We can always have another one. We could have more discussion, just another work session. I mean, it's really up to you. I mean, at some point, I mean, we're just decisions that's going to have to be made to move it forward as is, or make some possible changes to it, either to the document, to the map. That's really what it boils down to at this point. I mean, I think we've worked through pretty much everything that we can work through. We'll take, if you have specific things you'd like us to look into, let us know. We'll be more than happy to do that. But at this point, I think we've addressed everything we can think to address.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think probably each individual person on there has a few things that gives them heartburn other than this, and I have a couple. I'd just like to throw them out. I know it's time to go, but can I just throw them out for food for thought? I think we're going to have some more. This is a great discussion today. This was great. And this setting lends itself good to a discussion, and it's tough over there. One thing that Steve and I had said something about, and it's going to sound like the Golden Girl here, but picture this. On the rock quarry situation, we talked about 1,500 feet setback for rock quarry. You add 1,500 feet, you do the math on it, it gives you about a 200-acre buffer. Picture that the rock quarry, the little gray in the center right there be the rock quarry. A subdivision on the right-hand side, I'm in agreement, 1,500 feet. But the rest of the land, north, south, north, east, and west, it's farmland that's never going to be used. It can't be used. It can't be divided. Food for thought. If we make a 500 setback on the boundary line of the quarry on that side, and the adjoining landowner sign over his piece of property for the additional 1,000 feet, that would, I'm sure he'd be compensated if somebody wanted to come in and build a rock quarry.
You're giving the rock quarry permission to approach the adjacent landowner and say, hey, I'm not gonna do anything with it, and this is forevermore,
and he would
or
definitely
whatever.
probably be compensated. Just some way where he doesn't,
Easement?
yeah, we don't zone something out like you talked about. We don't zone something out. And we talked about the road. We want it 1,500 feet off the road. I don't think there's anything sacred about a road. A rock quarry, they go in and out, in and out. They're usually buffered. You see the trucks. People go down the road for about 4 reasons. They're texting, they're on the phone, they're listening to music, and driving is probably the 4th responsibility on a road. So, but the person across the road, that part would be sacred, his part. So I'm saying, if you got a subdivision, let's stay 1,500. If you got somebody who's got a home, let's stay 1,500. But if there's some land in this county, and there is land in this county, that wouldn't be perfect like that, but we could work out something. I understood it under Robert Stroop and Buster Walter, and there's ways to work these situations out. There's a lot of things. There's more. Something else I go back to one more right quick. The construction of the storm shelter. I talked about this a little bit in one of our meetings we had. The construction shall comply with the latest edition of the International Code, ICC 500 Storm Shelter Standards. I said if you call it a root cellar, you don't have to comply with this. I go back to, we built a pavilion at our church, and a $6,000 6-post, 8-post pavilion ran into $20,000 because we had to have a 90-mile-an-hour wind load. A guy wants to build him a storm cellar. If he has to go through, I don't know what these regulations are. I don't know what they are. They may be cheap. I don't know, but I don't want to get there.
You'd rather county be protected as the codes be met, sort of what you're saying.
I want my root
The
cellar.
individual.
When we went through that, I remember having this discussion then when we had brought that up, like when you brought up your example, someone wants to build a root cellar but use it as a storm shelter, they can still do that. Without following those guidelines. That's right. Now, if they are building it, so I want to build a storm shelter and I want to meet the requirements that are in the zoning. I don't want to have to meet, the set or count it as accessory space, those kind of things. Fine. You build it to those standards, whatever they are, you're fine. If you just want to call it a root cellar, whatever else you want to do with it, we just treat it as any other accessory structure in our mind. So when they say, well, I built myself a storm shelter, and heaven forbid something happens and it doesn't function as well as it should, they can't come back to us and say, well, you approved it as a storm shelter. I can look back and say, no, we didn't. We approved it as a root cellar or whatever. Yeah.
Storm shelters were going to be registered with 911 also.
Right.
Where a root cellar will not be.
Right, that's correct.
So if I come in with a Alabama license plate, storm shelters on the side of my truck,
Right. Yeah, and I think that we were looking for that. So if somebody wants to build a real storm shelter, there would be guidelines that they would have to abide by to do that.
I have a couple more things, so I think everybody here has some more things they want to bring up. So I think we're still in the study session.
And if you want to, over the next couple of weeks, come up with those things, get them to staff, let us compile a list, and how we can address those things.
I was going to say to Mr. Lynch, I think that may be a pretty good idea on your rock quarry idea thing, but I don't know the legalities of that. Something we may need to check with our county attorney on. Another piece of property that's not what we're looking at being part of the buffer or the setback, allowance or something. I don't know how that would work.
We'll look into that. We'll talk with Mr. Terry and Jeremy and Josh, obviously, and try to work through that.
I've got to go ahead. No, because mine's unrelated to this. So
what I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, just like Commissioner Lynch there saying, I believe everybody sitting around here may have different things like that. I'd like to propose that, and this is not, I don't think a motion's required in this, but maybe the next 2 meetings we use those as workout sessions with our regular agendas to sort of smooth these things over, get them taken care of, and look for maybe the June 11th meeting to be our voting time. That way everybody can sort of plan towards that and work towards that time. And because I know you're getting tired of hearing me saying something about the farmers and agriculture, but I do know we have agriculture zoning playing within this too. And we haven't mentioned that much, but I'd mentioned to Doug here about the possibility of simplifying that process a little bit as far as the zoning requirement is concerned, where a farmer wouldn't feel so much that he is tied up into that zoning, whereas if later on he has the situation, as we've talked about here, where he has to leave the farm or whatever, that the fees that are involved, the length of time it's involved to get that zoning changed, that maybe we can reduce some of that and make that just a little bit process there, and work in those things too to work in that process there. So maybe that will help.
It's a good suggestion, and I think one that we just probably will adopt. So our target will be, did you have the June date?
June 11th, I believe. Is
June
that
the 11th.
Is that the second Monday?
So it won't go to full commission until August because we won't meet in July?
Yeah.
Right, well, right, and it would have to be, I mean, we'd have to advertise 30 days, and we'd be pushing it at that point. So I mean, that's not, I wouldn't worry too much about that. So that's.
It mentioned
June and July, excuse me. June and July with the county commission is gonna be,
Budget.
yeah, all budgets type stuff anyway, so we don't wanna confuse any of that. But the June the 11th sounds reasonable.
And that could change too, with some of the things we bring up.
Right, again, we're not on any kind of a time frame as far as that
Make a
goes.
schedule.
Yeah.
Let's just go.
Now that could be a stated goal for us to maybe have a public hearing and then a motion following that public hearing on June the 11th. Something like that, so.
And we can
we'll
kind
think
of,
about that.
as time, I mean, we still have a couple of meetings between now and then. We can kind of, we'll see where it goes, and we
Okay.
can kind of shore that up as we go. So.
Okay. Is that it?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
one more comment. I want to thank all of y'all for what you do and for the service you provide to your community. It's not easy. It's controversial. One thing that I've observed over the years is I can write this stuff down and toss it out there, but I don't ever have to vote on it. And you do, and it's a very difficult process. This issue of property rights is so delicate, and it's one that you have a responsibility, I guess, to try to balance one property owner's rights against another property owner's rights, because what you do on one lot affects the next lot. And so that's kind of how zoning balances the issues of impacts of properties on one another. So that's just a observation. Thank you.
With every right comes responsibilities, and that's sort of what you're talking about there.
Just on behalf of the staff, I'd just say thank you as well. This has been an informative decision. We revisited some things and brought some things back to clarity, and also have made some decisions too that hopefully are compromise decisions. What does that really mean? It just means that maybe you didn't get exactly what you wanted, and Steve didn't get exactly what he wanted, but what that really means is that we've tried to reach a compromise that might be in everyone's best interest, and that's, to me, that's good work.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, and this was something that I was quoted in the paper saying, and I'll say it again because I do believe it. I don't know exactly when this became, in some people's eyes, an us versus them mentality. It was never meant to be that way. In my mind, I don't see it that way. This was always the way the process was supposed to work, where, you know, we have varying interests in this document and in the map, and we work toward a solution where not everybody gets everything they want, but I think everybody gets something along the lines of what they were looking for. But, and I'll say it again for those who may be watching, my phone is always there to take phone calls. My office is always open if people want to come and discuss these things. I'm more than happy to sit down with anybody and talk with anybody about it. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree with what people say all the time or they'll agree with me, but that's, again, part of the process. And this was never meant to be us versus them. So I just throw that out there.
I think Mike had something. Did you?
Yeah, I have, everybody through, I have a total, I probably should have brought it up in the regular meeting. The subdivision of River Birch Farms and the the retention pond.
Right.
We gotten any further on that?
Mr. Corbett has been taking it all, and why don't you got, Dell, can come to the podium. so they
It
can
may be
read
out of place to ask it in this forum, but
Mr. Corbett's playing the role of fly on the wall in this meeting, I think.
No, we work with David Johns. We've had the owner of the lot, the one that purchased the pond in, and the latest we've heard, there's an agreement that the pond will be turned over to the homeowner association to take care of that particular situation. And the owner who had put those pipes in is going to put some additional pipes in. And so there's some agreement working on that, and we're working on solving that problem.
has there been any inquiry with the owner as to whether he has modified or put bentonite in the pond? Because I know years ago that did not hold water.
I asked that gentleman that question at our meeting, and basically he didn't give me an answer.
It was built as a pond, it did not hold. I have some familiarity with the property, and that's the only reason I've asked about it.
Our next meeting is at 6 p.m. on Monday, June the 11th, and it will be at the
Well,
courthouse.
there's May. Don't forget the May meeting.
May 14th.
May 14th.
The reason I brought that up, our next meeting is May 14th at 6 p.m. Yeah, had it turned the wrong date. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Our favorite place.